I never hear any political party talk about this, or hardly, certainly no major one. I don't hear the wokers talk about it. I don't hear any of them talk about it. This exchange of non-existent theoretical money called credit for real wealth and resources has sucked the wealth of the world into the hands of the few. Why are governments borrowing money from private banking systems and the population paying interest upon that borrowing? Why aren't the governments issuing their own currency interest-free and lending it to the population interest-free to go about their commerce and go about their lives, creating opportunities and choices that they wouldn't otherwise have? Why are we allowing a privately owned, in the end by a tiny few people, banking system to issue non-existent credit money and then be able to take the wealth of the people if they don't pay it back? And there's another thing on this. The same people that lend the money, the credit, dictate if the economy goes up or the economy goes down. Thus, they can lend lots of money and there's a boom. And then they can crash the economy and people can't pay back the wealth, the loans that they took out for no fault of their own, not because they're sitting on the side of the street saying, I'm not going to work. They want to work. Economy's knackered. So what happens then? Those that have lent the non-existent credit and crash the economy can then suck up all the wealth that was put as collateral for the non-existent money. Now, what we're going to see in relation to what I've just said is a frenzy of repossession of properties. A frenzy. If people want to focus on how we get our freedom back, then private banks lending money at interest, non-existent money called credit, has to end, or at least it has to be an add-on. We need a system, not a communistic system, but a system where governments are able to issue the currency interest-free. Because you say to people, how is money created? And they say, oh, the government does it. Well, almost entirely it doesn't. Money comes into circulation by private banks lending credit. And when they lend lots of credit, then there's the opportunity for lots of economic activity. And when they squeeze the credit, what did they say in 2008? A credit crunch. When they squeeze the credit, they're taking out of circulation units of exchange, and economic activity cannot take place, and so we go into a recession. Changing the banking system, taking control of our economic lives, our livelihoods, our choice out of the hands of private banks, that would change everything on the level that we are talking about. But no one ever talks about it politically. Why? Because Britain is a one-party state. We have a one-party state Labour Party, a one-party state Conservative Party. In America, you have a one-party state Republican Party, a one-party state Democratic Party. And these one-party groupings, all these major political parties, are ultimately controlled by the same network that controls the banking system. And because of that, the politicians controlled by those people are not going to challenge the banking system controlled by those same people. Whenever I've talked to politicians about how money's created, not one of them has been able to tell me. I've asked economists, some economists I've met over the years, how was money created? They didn't bloody know. They're economists. It's the private banking system issuing non-existent theoretical money called credit. That's the whole basis of it. And if I demanded that someone take from me money that doesn't exist, or I tried to give people money that didn't exist, telling them it was real, I'd get frickin' arrested. They'd say that's counterfeit money. But banks can make loans of credit which has never, does not, and will never exist except in theory. And they don't get arrested. They become the 1%. And that's how they've done it. That's how they've done it. That's how a few have accrued the wealth of the world. And so if Black Lives Matter, or anybody's lives matter, want to make a real difference to people's lives, they should be campaigning for the transformation of the world financial system and the end of private banks, ultimately controlled by the same people if you go deep enough, literally dictating the economic choices of closing in on 8 billion people. Money doesn't really exist, it's a theory. If you look at how the world's been acquired, it's been done by a banking scam where you lend people money that doesn't exist, we call it credit, and you charge them interest on it. And if they don't pay the money back plus interest, then you get their wealth that does exist. You get their home, their business, their land, their resources, whatever. And we've been through a process of banks lending credit, figures on a screen, greatly in excess of what they have as assets, called fractional reserve lending. And then when they can't pay it back, because often the banks have taken actions that have crashed the economy, like in 2008, the banks then get all the things they've lent money on, the real wealth of the world. And what's happened in this process of lending credit, getting the real resources when they can't pay back the credit, has sucked the wealth of the world, the real wealth of the world, into the hands of very, very few people, and left out there most of the rest of the population with something called money. And money only buys anything because we take it seriously. You know, if it's just a piece of paper, and this is the point, it's meant not even to be a piece of paper, it's meant to be purely electronic. And so we have this fresh air money that is worth something because the buyer and the seller believe in it, and only because of that. And the real wealth of the world has been sucked into the hands of a very few people by lending this scam called credit. Another interesting thing about this money situation is when you go to a bank and you say borrow £50,000, they'll type into your account £50,000 in credit. Where's the credit come from? Here. But you're not paying back £50,000. You're paying back £50,000 plus interest. The interest is never created, only the principal. Because people think that governments create money. Money is overwhelmingly created by private banks issuing credit. That's how so-called money comes into circulation. So what this means is creating credit for the principal but not the interest, is that at no point is there ever enough money, credit or otherwise, in circulation to pay back all the debt and all the interest on the debt outstanding. So people losing their homes and their businesses and their resources, etc., is built into the system on purpose. Now, when there's an expansion of the money supply, an expansion of money in circulation, Peter paying Paul, that seems, you know, to hide it to an extent. But once you squeeze the money supply, you take money out of circulation, it becomes obvious that there's nothing like enough money in circulation to pay back all the debt. So there's people losing their homes, their resources, their things that they own, for no other reason that there simply is not enough money for everyone to pay back the debt. So what do the banks do? Ooh, we'll have that. And this has been going on for centuries, and they've hijacked the real wealth of the world by doing this. And the next stage, which is in my books from the early 1990s, is the cashless society. You know, I was pointing out, purely by knowledge of what this agenda was, that they were going to get rid of cash. And look at it. Cash is flying out of circulation. Some places like Sweden is almost totally cashless. They're shutting down bank branches, so you cannot interact with a bank branch locally with cash. You have to do it online because that's electronic money. And eventually they're going to take the cash out of circulation. Why? Because when you go into a store now or anywhere and you give them a credit card, electronic money, and that they say, sorry, the system won't accept your card, well, you can still pay cash. But when there's no cash in circulation, your electronic money, which is meant to go through a microchip eventually, when they say the system won't accept your microchip or your card, you have no other means of purchase. So whoever controls the system is dictating whether you can purchase or whether you can't, whether you can eat or whether you can't. And the only other alternative to that would be barter. And I'll tell you what the plan is. The plan is to ban barter, to make it illegal on the basis that they can't tax it. So that's along the line as well.
How does cryptocurrency play into this?
I'm not saying that there couldn't be good things with things like Bitcoin and stuff like that, as long as cash stays in circulation. That's the key. While cash is in circulation, you have other points of or ways of purchase. Once there's no cash and you have only cashless digital currencies, then whoever controls them controls everything. And not only that, they can wipe your bank account. If you're a dissident to the system, as this moves on into more extremes, they can wipe your bank account. And it's just gone. Because all it is figures on a screen. You can wipe figures on a screen in a second. You can, from a central point, crash the entire economy by controlling digital money and digital processes. And the idea eventually, problem, reaction, solution, create the problem and then offer the solution, is to have a gigantic crash, which they will instigate. And then to overcome the crash, they will propose a totally new economic system of central control to be the solution to the problem they've created, which is crashing the economy. And the more control they have over money digitally, electrically, the easier it is to do that.